You're listening to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. Season ticket holders and lifelong fans with neighborhood ties discuss Cubs news and neighborhood happenings. Here's your hosts, Jeremy and Pat.
Hello and welcome to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. This is episode 348 of the podcast. My name is Jeremy Deemer and I'll be your host. I'm joined as always by my co-host. He's my cousin and he's high atop Wrigleyville tonight. How's it going, Pat?
Enjoying the beautiful day, Jeremy.
It is a beautiful Chicago day. We got to talk baseball. So we will talk about the week.
Why'd you have to ruin it?
I know. We have to talk about the week that was for the Cubs and what a difference a week makes. I bet our predictions are going to be different this week. What a difference a week makes.
Well, in fairness, I think we predicted 3 and 4 last week, right?
We did.
And the Cubs were 2 and 5.
They were.
It was Matt Trueblood that set us astray with his 4 and 3 prediction.
But man, it could have really, those 2 wins, it could have been an even worse week than a 2 and 5 week. To help us unpack all of the Cubs news, happenings, preview the week ahead, longtime friend of the show, you know him from his frequent appearances on this podcast, all of his baseball writings, his appearances on CHGO, of course. We're talking about Jared Wyllys. Jared, thanks for taking time out to talk Cubs with us tonight.
Good to be with you guys. Thanks for having me.
And if you're watching on the YouTube version of this, it's audio only for Jared because he is able to take out some time. He's outside. He's an outside cast. So if you hear the cicadas buzzing in the background, that's what's going on. And so we are going to go ahead and talk about the week that was. We talked about it being an important week, Jared. 4 games against the Brewers. And you had to have a good showing because after that series, you're only going to have 7 more shots head-to-head with Milwaukee. It would be devastating for them to be able to pull out ahead. And here we are, worst case scenario, Cubs dropping 3-4 in Milwaukee. I know you were just in Milwaukee covering the White Sox series as well. So your thoughts on the series in Milwaukee and then where the Brewers are juxtaposed with the Cubs going forward here.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to be up in Milwaukee twice in the last week. I was up there on Wednesday for the Shota Imanaga's first poor showing of the season. Got to see that unfold in person. And then, I was up there on Sunday for the White Sox Brewers Tommy Pham William Contreras showdown. So it was quite an exciting couple of days up there. But yeah, going into that Brewers series, I mean, this was I think, all important opportunity to narrow the gap in the standings and even potentially move ahead of the Brewers had things gone differently. But the one thing that they didn't want to have happen is basically what did, to drop 3 or 4, move even further back. And then to follow that up with that series against the Reds that didn't really go any better. This is about as much of a free fall as I've seen the Cubs in quite some time. And I think we've all seen, the May record for the Cubs and the White Sox, and the Cubs only had 1 more win or something to that effect. So, when you're playing on that level, you're not in good company at all. So, we are watching a team with the Cubs right now that you don't want to get into this too early, but it is June where you have to start to wonder, are they impacting what the approach at the trade deadline is going to be? It feels in many ways like there's some pieces there where if they make the right additions, they could get themselves back into contention. But if you're struggling to stay at 500, let alone above 500, and you're 7+ games behind the Brewers, it can be a lot tougher to justify, hey, let's go add some pieces in July. as opposed to going the other way.
So can I just throw out something that I find potentially depressing, but also probably informative for your discussion here? The Cubs have 6 games left against the Brewers, 3 at the end of June and 3 in July. By July 24th or so, the Cubs will have concluded their entire season's games versus the Brewers. So we'll know before the trade deadline even comes what the Cubs' situation is as it relates to the Brewers. There will be zero opportunity to catch up any games on the Brewers if the Cubs are in fact behind them after July in terms of head-to-head play, which is weird because typically in the old days schedules were backloaded, so you would play a lot of divisional
September
games. September.
Yeah.
I can't remember the last time the Cubs did not play the Brewers the last 2 weeks of the season at all, let alone the last 2 months of the season. I find it disconcerting. And as you said at the top, Jeremy, making last week's performance all the more devastating, frankly, in terms of what the Cubs can do. Yeah, after Wednesday, July 24th, Cubs and Brewers do not play again.
It was compounded by their performance against Cincinnati at home, losing 2 of 3. And the one they did win was the rain-soaked extra inning post-midnight
fiasco.
Yes, where you did get deep into the Reds bullpen. You should have won that game. It was incredible. It was as frustrating as the entire week was. Thank goodness they were able to pull it out. But man, what a rough, just an overall rough week. I mean, there's the finally DFAing Nick Madrigal and bringing up David Bote is not going to solve this problem.
Well, yeah, I think if you're bringing up David Bote to help your offense, that's things are really not going well, because if you're looking for a spark for the lineup, does it need to be said that that's not the guy? No. I'm happy for him because he's been stuck in AAA purgatory for a long time and probably has deserved a shot at getting back into the majors. But because of roster construction stuff, 40-man roster situations, like the opportunity just hasn't been there. But yeah, it kind of felt like when they announced this move before Sunday's game, then he's in the lineup. It sort of felt like, hey, David Bote's here. He's going to help us out. And I thought, wait a minute, this is David Bote we're talking about, who, again, happy for the guy, but your offense needs a whole lot more than a boost from him to get yourself back into like any serious conversation for this division.
Well, I feel like a couple things. One, Bote did draw a walk, so there.
Yeah, that's
but, so I mean, at your own peril shall you denigrate his offensive abilities. But on top of that, it did seem this week that we finally saw some life out of the bat of Seiya Suzuki for the first time since he came off the injured list. And Ian Happ continued his methodical march toward just above mediocrity with another fairly strong week. So even Dansby Swanson had a home run. So you started to see some signs of life from the Cubs bats, I guess. And yet, how does that translate in real life? Well, I guess, the Cubs scored 6 runs in the first couple games, and then it was 4 and 4 and then 7 and then 2. So it wasn't the worst. Certainly it was better than the 1 and 2 run performances we'd seen in weeks previous, not to mention the back-to-back shutouts to Atlanta. But we're going to need more from those guys, and we're going to need more from Morel and others if the Cubs are going to have any chance here of turning things around.
And I think the misfortune of the offense kind of coming to life, lining up with some of your pitchers who had previously really been holding you guys above water, having struggles at the same time. So, I feel like you say this with struggling teams a lot, but when you can't get those two things synced up at the same time, it's really, really hard to win, because we had such a good stretch like where the starting pitching felt like almost untouchable. And then now when they're having some starts where, as is going to happen in a baseball season, they get touched up a little bit, it helps that your offense scores then. But man, it would be nice when Shota Imanaga is shutting everybody out if we were also scoring some runs, or, rewarding Ben Brown for his performances on the mound and what Javier Assad has done. Because a really scary thought is, if not for what the starting pitching has done the first 2 months of the season, where would this team be? We'd be in much, much worse shape. I think, say that goes without saying. I'm stating the obvious here, but it just goes to show, in my opinion, though, that there are the pieces there, but for whatever reason, your offense kind of collectively slumps while your pitching is doing well. And then that just flipped on us here recently. And so because of that, I'm not writing off this team just yet. I think they're capable of getting on a hot stretch for a while, but that really does need to happen soon, because like Pat said, you don't get head-to-head matchups against Milwaukee after, that last week of July. And that's, in my opinion, is scheduling mismanagement. That's an atrocity that they're not playing each other in September. It's ridiculous. But that's,
or August.
Or even August,
or the last week of July.
give them something later in the season. The two teams, all of these divisional opponents, should be playing each other the last 5 weeks of the season at least, in my opinion. But that's another subject, I guess. But yeah, it's they've been maddening on that front lately.
Yeah,
I would say that I'm sorry, Jerry. It's just the quick note that the starting pitching was kind of curious this week, because while Assad and Teon had kind of mediocre starts, Imanaga did get blasted for the first time. But that was weird because he had gotten an extra, basically, start off. He had the rainout game a week ago, and then for whatever reason, the Cubs chose to hold on to him and not pitch him for another week before they put him back in. I guess maybe to give him some extra rest, and that seemed, I don't know if that contributed to his lack of sharpness, but certainly didn't get any benefit from taking a start off.
Did you hear anything when you were there, Jared? Did they address that, the time off?
Yeah, I mean, we asked him about it after the game, because that is, you can't ignore the fact that they essentially skipped a start, and he's been sitting for 10 days between starts, and he, it's, for what it's worth, he said, "Oh no, it wasn't a factor. It wasn't an issue. I felt more rested. I felt more recovered, and I was fine." But I think it's really hard to take that. I think you have to take something like the comments like that from him with a big grain of salt, because is he really going to? Well, is he really going to publicly say, "Oh man, these guys messed me up, having me sit for this long, and really threw me off my rhythm"? I don't think he's going to say that to us, but it is hard to ignore the fact that the first time he looks really not so sharp out there and gets tagged for a bunch of runs is his first start after not pitching for 10 days. And we all know that starting pitchers, especially, they're creatures of routine, and they have their, they make their start and their day-to-day routine that helps them prepare for the next one. And when a guy gets off of that routine, especially a guy who is new to the league, who is adjusting to pitching in Major League Baseball, that's, that we can't just brush that aside. And of course, he faced a really good Brewers lineup. You don't want to, I don't want to glaze over that fact too. But like I said, I think he said it wasn't a factor. I say take that with a grain of salt. And I'm very curious to see how he will look this week when he pitches again.
On the flip side, we saw Ben Brown have the perfect sort of encapsulation of a rookie week, right? He comes out, he throws 7 no-hit innings with 10 strikeouts. Doesn't get a win, of course, because the Cubs can't score. And then they give up the lead, and then the Cubs come back and win, thankfully, in the 10th inning. So he doesn't get credit for the win, but he certainly deserved it. And then he comes out the next time at home against an inferior team and gets blasted. Like that's such a rookie week, right? Like the ups and downs as he's figuring stuff out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is the the kind of thing that it'll drive you nuts if you read too much into it. But yeah, it goes from looking untouchable to against the Reds, like couldn't get it out. So yeah, it's a rookie week. It's what are you gonna do? Move on to the next one with that. But yeah, he's overall, man, he's been really, I think, exciting. I mean, it's outperformed what I think anybody expected, especially in his first season.
A real bright spot.
Yeah, especially when you think about what the Cubs traded for him. He wasn't some piece of like a major trade. This was David Robertson for Ben Brown. That's, early returns are looking pretty nice.
That's a great point. I think people that's one to put in the positive column when we evaluate Jed Hoyer, which will happen at the end of this season based on the performances now. The way that this roster is constructed, we were talking about it over the weekend, that the way that this roster was constructed, everything has to go right all the time. Otherwise, the wheels just come off. If everything doesn't go just right, then it just doesn't work. And that's so pitching, offense, they have struggled to get everything to line up properly, and these are the results. At least now we're seeing some offensive production, but wow, is it's just incredibly frustrating to see. Now you're in June, and now you're looking ahead. The Cubs have lost 6 straight series as they go in to play the White Sox at home for 2. And these games, as we look ahead to next week, 2 against the White Sox at home, 4 at Cincinnati. Jared, these 2 games against the White Sox, a split would be disappointing, right?
It has to be, because the White Sox are as bad of a baseball team as I think I've ever seen.
Technically, they're on pace to be the worst baseball team ever anyone's seen. So, I mean, you got that going for you.
Yeah. Every week they set some new franchise record for futility.
And we've got Imanaga going on the Tuesday game too. So
right, against Chris Flexen. So
the sad part is the White Sox have lost 11 in a row. So you feel like there's got to be, how that works, right?
I know.
Well, that's the one scary thing about it is just like statistically speaking, it's bound to happen that they're going to kind of back their way into a win sometime soon. And you just hope it's not in the next 2 games. But odds are it very much could happen. I mean, on the Wednesday game, the Cubs will face Eric Fetty, who has been, for the White Sox, one of their few bright spots. After a season in Korea, he's pitched really well. So that could be an interesting matchup for them in that second game. But yeah, you'd like to think on Tuesday night that Shota Imanaga versus Chris Flexen that the Cubs could pull a win there.
And 2 wins against the White Sox get you back to 500 at least. You're right now looking at the standings here in June, 7.5 games behind Milwaukee and under 500. So getting at least over the 500 mark is huge.
Remember in April when the Cubs were winning a lot of games and then they would lose? It seemed like every loss was like a loss they should have won also. Like either the bullpen failed them at the end or something weird happened. And it's like, well, we could be nearly undefeated, right? There just didn't seem like a lot of games where the Cubs were like, yeah, that's a loss, put it in the L column.
They were one of the all-April teams.
Either we won the game or it's like, we should have won the game. A, it doesn't feel like that anymore. And B, I wish we'd had some of those games back that we could have won and didn't, because remember when we were up 9-0, right, against the Padres once and lost? Like it's funny how that works out, but it's already the beginning of June. It's like, gosh, I wish we had those games back because we need them. I mean, in terms of the standings, in terms of the rest of the season, you hate, we always say it, you hate giving up games in April that you should win. but it becomes just more of a reality as the season progresses, especially season the way it's progressing this year.
And it's I think a valuable reminder that you can't, you never want to make too much of one loss, especially early in the season. However, as the season goes on, the more you can get yourself, a buffer and pile up wins early in the season, then it puts you in a better spot for when inevitably some of the slumps come or injuries come or whatever, where, yeah, like you said, it'd be nice to have some of those wins from a month and a half ago or so, because it sure would come in handy now. We'd be in a much, much different situation. Even if they were sitting at 500 right now, even that alone, I think would make a big difference. But I think I can pinpoint where things went wrong. So last October, I ran the Chicago Marathon.
Okay.
And I was all set. Last year I signed up in April. And so around late April, early May, I was thinking about, like, do I want to sign up and run this thing again? And this year's Chicago Marathon is October 13th, I believe. And I said to myself, you know what? I'm not going to sign up for it because it's looking like the Cubs could be a playoff team, and I would hate to be dealing with the stress of the marathon and trying to cover the playoffs. So to all Cubs fans, this one's on me.
Makes a lot of sense.
I'm just, but it's speaking of things you can't glaze over and ignore. The timing is suspicious.
With your jinxing aside, do you feel that, like, it's still early June, right? So it's still early, but it feels like 7.5 games behind the Brewers in this division. Feels like a lot of games, doesn't it? Even though objectively we look at the Brewers, and while they've certainly done better offensively than we expected, I still question the pitching, and of course Devin Williams isn't even back yet, so it could get better. But gosh, it feels like 7.5 games. You're just a couple more bad weeks away from just really punting the division, which I never thought the Cubs would be in this position at this point of the season.
Oh, and you still haven't played the Cardinals more than once yet. So they're
Right.
ahead of us in the standings, and that could get out of hand as well. So you could be a solid third place going into July.
The Cubs could be behind the Reds after this week if things go really poorly. But yeah, just the fact that the lack of games against the Brewers coming up, and then being this far behind. If the Cubs find themselves 9 games behind the Brewers on July 24th, with no games remaining against them, that seems like a really steep hill to climb.
Because you're totally dependent on them losing to other teams, or dependent on what happens in their other series. That's why, you've got to, when you have those head-to-head matchups, whenever they fall in the season, you've got to take those. And it's, we could be by that, July 24th, like 3rd, 4th place. Like, that's kind of a scary thought.
I feel a lot better if the Cubs are 5 games out at the end of this week. Any thought on that happening?
Well, I think, like we said, I think the White Sox, you've got to take both of those.
I'm willing to do that.
But the series that I think is concerning is 4 games in Cincinnati against the Reds, a team that you did not look very good against just this past weekend. And I think historically, going to Cincinnati has been, can be tough sometimes. I know some of the guys hit really well there. I'm sure Ian Happ is just like chomping at the bit to get down there, because he always hits well in that park. But those are 4 games that to me are looming pretty large, and I don't even think taking 2 out of 4 is what you need right now. I think this has to be a big week. You've got to take 2 from the White Sox, and you've got to get 3 from the Reds.
Meanwhile, the Brewers play the red-hot Philadelphia Phillies on the road at Philadelphia, and then they travel to Detroit to play the upstart Tigers. So if they come away from that unscathed, then they really are rolling. I mean, this is a good week for them to kind of come back down. The Brewers come back down to earth a little bit, but with a nice 2-4 effort.
it's definitely a measuring stick, I think, for them, particularly that Phillies series, because that's, the best team in the National League right now, or looking like the best team. So how do you stack up against those guys? And Detroit isn't, that's not a pushover series either. But yeah, we might have a good sense for like, hey, is Milwaukee for real? Are these guys legit? Especially with that Philadelphia being a road series, could be an interesting week.
Why do the Cubs have to play the Reds' best pitchers again? That seems unfair. I know it's a 4-game series, so you're going to get almost all.
You're going to get almost all of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Still,
We could that line that up a little bit better? I mean, come on.
So we've said what the desired outcome for the week should be. We're going to go on the record right now with our predictions for what actually will be. Pat, we will start with you. Your predictions for the week, the upcoming 6 games.
I'm going to say I think the Cubs are going to go 3-3. Is that bad?
3-3 seems doable.
It's gonna be hard. It's gonna be hard to hand the White Sox their 12th and 13th consecutive losses back to back. And then when you go to Cincinnati, I feel like a split is in order. Because Lodolo and Green, these pitchers are not bad pitchers. And I don't know. I've never liked playing in Cincinnati.
No,
maybe I'm just I've got a lot of PTSD from that. But it's been rough there. This is a two Imanaga start week, so that works on the plus side, right?
Yes, definitely does.
But I'm being cautiously optimistic.
3-3
from Pat. Lock it in. Jared, how are you feeling about this week? Predictions?
I've got to say I'm feeling just about the same, because, like we said, I think just the odds of getting the White Sox to lose what would be 13 in a row, just in the world of baseball, that's really tough to do. And the White Sox oftentimes come to Wrigley and play fairly well. And there's also the small chance that Luis Robert Jr. makes his return soon, and it might fall during that Cubs series, because he was DHing for their AAA team on Sunday. All reports are that he's looking and feeling really good. And let's be honest, if they're going to have him make his comeback during any series, why not have it be during the Crosstown series? So they could get Luis Robert back. And so I think a split with the White Sox is probably the most realistic outcome. And then I look at a 4-game road series, and almost always, what do we say? You hope to take at least 2, a 4-game, a 2-2 split in a 4-game series on the road is generally viewed as like, hey, that's a pretty good outcome. So as much as the Cubs need more, I think 3-3 is probably what they're going to get this week.
I will be the pessimist of the week, and I'm going to say 2-4. I do agree 100% with the split of the White Sox series. I think they split the White Sox, and then I only think they get 1 on the road in Cincinnati. I'm not confident. There's nothing that's changed. We're just hoping that teams play worse, Cubs play better. Nothing has really changed enough for me to think that the outcome would be any different after this past weekend.
You'll see. The Cubs are going to come back this week. Willie Harris is gonna wave in the runners. By the way, since we're talking about the Cubs and we talked about Ben Brown having a great game, we didn't really mention specifically. Justin Steele had 2 decent games last week. On paper anyway. One of which,
yes,
he gave up a ton of unearned runs, in part because Seiya Suzuki dropped a fly ball and 3 runs scored on it, but then followed up with a grand slam. So make it that way you will. But I think the controversial play of the week was just the other day on Friday. And probably, if the Cubs win the Friday game, I think we feel a lot better about that week, right? Instead of this 2-4 slide, we salvage 2 out of 3 from the Reds, and we're 3-3, and we don't feel quite as bad, maybe. Or I guess 3-4. But instead they lost. And what would you have done in that situation? Because I've seen a lot of like sort of after the fact, obviously, do you send Madrigal? No, but because he was thrown out by a decent amount. But in the real time, I was thinking about this, and as bad as the Cubs have been at clutch hitting this year, you have what, maybe a 20% chance that if they hold him at third, that the Cubs score that run, because there were 2 outs at the time. Versus what are the odds that if he runs, that the throw is off the line, or that something happens, the catcher drops it. There's a lot of possibilities. Was it more than an 80% chance he'd be thrown out at home? That's how I kind of was looking at it. And I kind of got to think, I see why he was sent. I mean, not that he's fast, and not that it worked out, and not that Ellie De La Cruz doesn't have a great arm, but what would have been the likelihood had they not sent him? I don't know. I'm arguing for the play that failed, so I guess that's probably not a strong position to be in. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think typically I would say, I hate giving up the third out at home like that. In that scenario, I think my inclination would be to play it a little more conservatively and keep Madrigal at third. But knowing the state of what Cubs clutch hitting has been with 2 outs, do you trust somebody to bring him home? Because you don't even have a sacrificed opportunity there. It's a tough spot, but ultimately I still think, like, and people can say, like, I've got the benefit of what the outcome was, but when you look at who their Reds shortstop is, and the arm that he has, where that ball was, Nick Madrigal's not a great runner. I didn't like the send when it happened. I still don't think I like it, even knowing that, like, you're putting a lot on the next batter to at least get the ball in over the infielders' heads or something, just to bring that run home. And the Cubs,
I guess
really,
technically it might have been the second out of the inning, right? I'm thinking back now, because didn't Bellinger fly out afterwards?
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look at the. Yeah,
it runs together in my head. Yeah, I think that's what it was. So the thought is, well, if you hold him, you only have 1 out, and then I guess technically you have a chance at a fly ball. So I guess that does change the equation a little bit. I don't know.
Yeah, because I think they're even more so, right? Like, trust that you can at least pull a sacrifice fly there or something.
And Bellinger did hit a fly ball, right? That's what happened. He hit a fly ball right afterwards.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So I had blocked that out. Wow, thanks
I
for prying that memory out of my
I blocked it out, and then it was all
memories.
coming back. I'm like, oh, wait a minute, I think I got that wrong. But I guess the point is, when you're not scoring a lot of runs, or when you've been struggling offensively, or feel like you have been, I think you end up taking more risks on plays like that than you ordinarily would.
For sure.
Yeah, I think so. And and honestly, if Willie Harris holds him at third, and then the Cubs get a strikeout and a ground out or something, then everybody's complaining that he didn't send him. It's tough, and I'm sure to some degree Harris is thinking, like, yeah, he knows the reality. Like, we're struggling to score. We need wins, and here's a game-tying opportunity. So I'm going to play this a little more aggressively, and there is probably a pretty good chance that throw is not right where it needs to be, or something like that, and he does score. So maybe you play those odds, but again, I'll hold to my original opinion, especially with 1 out. Trust that you can at least get a sac fly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Matt Trueblood's group, the North Side Bound, had a analysis of Willie Harris in terms of waving runners around. Like, the Cubs have a sort of a large number of outs at home. Like, it was like 74 or something over the course of the last several years. But they also tend to send more. They've been more aggressive about sending people home than other teams. And I think some of that might actually be also part of the notion that they don't score a lot of runs the last several years, so they've had to, like, take extra chances. And their actual percentage of cases where they've sent runners home has been consistent with the league. So high risk, high reward strategy for the Cubs.
So last bit of information before we wrap it up here. And we're going to talk 1984 Cubs. That's a segment we do every single week here in the 40th anniversary of the 1984 Cubs team. We will talk about what happened in this week in history. But before we do, I did want to make mention that today is, in fact, the 21st anniversary, so only going back 21 years, of when Sammy Sosa had the corked bat incident. Jared, do you remember that game?
I do remember that game. Yeah, I think like everybody else watching it on TV, trying to make sense of what was going on, and felt like you're watching the decline of Sammy to some extent. It was sort of almost like a say it ain't so Joe moment. Like, come on, Sammy, what are you doing? Yeah, do remember that game pretty well.
I was at that game.
Nice.
And I do remember distinctly feeling bad for Sosa because I'm like, it was just such a...
being there, it probably was like, what is going on? Why are we looking at this?
At first you're like, I'm looking at the play and I'm like, basically what's going on? Like the Rays player or coach I think it was Madden at the time. The players are coming in and complaining, and you're like, oh, well, because you don't really see you're focusing on the ball and him running.
Just a broken bat play, whatever.
Yeah, it really was really unfortunate. The fact that they were so careless, the bat boy was so careless in putting his batting practice bat into his game bat.
That's right.
And then bringing it out was, it was just unfortunate, but that's the kind of thing that happens occasionally. And, and then poor Sosa was then, presumed guilty. Let's put it that way. However, when they did go and search the rest of his bats, they found no other corked bats. Did you notice that? Because, and there are all kinds of stories about potential people climbing through air ducts to get into the clubhouse to get said bats, but that will remain a mystery for the ages, I guess.
And I can imagine being at the game even more confusing because in 2003, that's long before you have the video boards in the outfield.
Yeah,
sure.
There were no videos whatsoever.
Right.
You're just looking and then you see the broken bat but you still can't see the cork, right? Because the ball's coming out because they're too small.
That was when all the information was held by the people in the terrace reserves that had the CRT monitors below the suites. They were the only ones that had additional replays.
And I had my archaic flip phone, whatever, that gave me internet information, but not real time, not information that was useful. I could just see the score and things like that.
I was going to say, it's not like you could hop on Twitter and find out what was going on. Yeah.
Well, let's go even further back, long before Twitter, back to 1984. Pat, what was going on this week in 1984?
This week in 1984 was a decent enough week for the Cubs. They ended up going 3-3. As we concluded last week on Sunday, they had the 4-3 loss to the Reds, where Ron Say's home run was taken off the board, which
if you didn't hear last week's podcast where we went in depth into this particular Ron Say home run, and go back and listen to last week's episode.
And the unprecedented actions taken by the umpires. So the next game on Monday against the Reds was rained out, probably just as well. And then the Cubs played, they went on a road trip, 6-game road trip against the Braves and the Phillies. Cubs went 3-3. It was fairly ho-hum. We saw Steve Trout had a no-hitter through 7 1/3. And then the Cubs coughed up the lead, and they ended up winning it. And I think, did they win it actually? No, I guess he did get the win, but they almost coughed up the lead. So he ended up getting the win in that one. We had the old daily double that was penned by Harry Carey. We had Bob Dernier with a couple of 5-hit games in the leadoff role, and Sandberg had 2 home runs in a game, batting the 2 spots. So that was more daily double action. So, it was an overall decent week. I think the most memorable thing about the week was what happened today, 40 years ago, the Monday of following that week, when the 1984 amateur baseball draft took place. Now, keep in mind, the Cubs had not done well in 1983. In fact, they'd done so poorly that they had earned the right to draft third.
Nice.
Which means they were the third worst team. They had no lotteries back then. It was you earned your spot. So the Cubs took a left-handed pitcher from Morehouse State, very, very highly rated pitcher by the name of Drew Hall. Unfortunately, Drew Hall did not have as successful a career as you'd hope for. He ended up with a lifetime WAR of minus 1.4, which was in fact the worst of any first-round draft pick. In drafting him, and it's hindsight's 2020, as they say, but the 8th pick overall was Jay Bell, who had a fairly successful career. The 10th pick was a guy named Mark McGuire, probably could have been helpful at the time. Can you imagine Sosa and McGuire both on the Cubs in 1998? That would have been fun. And then the 24th pick in the first round was future Cub Terry Mulholland. So there you go. So that was the first. This was not a super strong draft in the first round when you look at it top to bottom. Those were sort of the highlights. The Cubs tried to make up for that selection in the second round, where they also drafted third, by taking a right-handed pitcher out of Nevada, a guy by the name of Greg Maddux, who, as it turns out, ended up with 106.6 WAR. So between Drew Hall and Greg Maddux, the Cubs got 53 WAR average out of their top 2 picks, which is one of the highest WAR averages, probably the highest in Cubs history for a first and second pick. So depending on how you slice it, you might say that was the most successful Cubs draft of all time. Then in the 6th round, the Cubs selected another left-handed pitcher named Jamie Moyer, who ended up with 49.8 WAR for his life. So 3 pitchers taken in the first 6 rounds, 2 of whom combined for 600 wins.
And 2 long careers. Yeah.
I guess all 3 of them combined for 600 wins when you look at it that way. But yeah, it was a fairly successful draft in that regard. Other notable players drafted. Tom Glavine was drafted in the 2nd round. Ken Caminetti was drafted in that draft. And I only went through the first 6 rounds. I didn't go any further. But among players drafted in the first 6 rounds, obviously Maddux had the all-time highest WAR, followed by Glavine and McGuire. But Jamie Moyer, the 4th most WAR of any player taken in the first 6 rounds of that draft. So I'd say that was a pretty good draft for Dallas Green and company. And it would portend a somewhat bright future for the late 80s. You always look at the young kids and what they're going to do. So in 84, the Cubs were in the midst of building a pitching staff for 1989, when they would then go back to the playoffs.
That's my team right there, that 89 team.
Well, now I'm imagining Mark McGuire on the 89 team.
Oh,
right.
That's
no kidding.
With about. Dawson, yeah. Here we go.
Yeah. And Sam Ray, that would have been a good team. So that was this week in 1984 Cubs history.
Let's go to this week in 2024. Jared, what's your schedule like? Are you going to be at one or both of these Sox games?
I will be at both. So I'll be at Wrigley on Tuesday and Wednesday, covering both games. And then back over to the south side for White Sox, Red Sox. But yeah, going to be taking in both of the Crosstown Cup Part 1 series games this week.
I plan on bringing my broom to Wednesday's game for this week.
Well, Jared, please remind all of our listeners where they can find your work on the internet.
Yeah, just about everything I write is on CHGO, so that's all chgo.com. Also make occasional appearances on their podcasts, but yeah, just check out the writing there. They can follow me on Twitter at jwyllys, JWYLLYS. And then I would love it if people signed up for my Substack.
Yes.
It's just called The Dugout, and I've got a link to that in my Twitter bio. You can subscribe for free, and there are paid options as well, but I'm happy to take any reader that I can get, free or otherwise. So, I'd love for people to join.
Yes, I am a paid subscriber and can't recommend the writings of Jared Wyllys enough. So please go give it a try. It's get the free option over there at the Substack. All those links are available on Jared's Twitter, and Instagram is a good follow for Jared as well. You can see what cigar he's smoking after a game.
I always forget about the Instagram too, but yeah, I try to put up a little post game video of just kind of a recap of the day. So yeah, it's the same handle, or no, it's at Jared Wyllys. So it's my full name on Instagram, I believe. But yeah, I'm sure if you search my name there, there's not many Jared Willises out there. So.
And while you're following Jared on all the social platforms, make sure you're following us as well at Wrigleyville Nat. That's X, Twitter, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky. We're on all the platforms at Wrigleyville Nat. And of course, we're pushing everyone to give us some support over at the YouTube channel that we launched. We're doing the video version of this podcast as well over at youtube.com. Search for Wrigleyville Nation Podcast. We could really use the likes, comments, follows, subscribes, everything you can do over at the YouTube. That helps us work the algorithm so other Cub fans can find the show. And make sure you're continuing to spread the word about the podcast, of course, and our Patreon, patreon.com/Wrigleyville Nation. That is how we bring you this show ad-free every single week, because our supporters pay the bills and keep the lights on for us. Every single penny goes right back into paying for hosting fees, domain names, mic cables, etc. So thanks again to all our patrons. We couldn't do the show without you. And with that, we're going to wrap it up. We're going to call it a podcast. Pat, any final words?
I'm looking forward to the Cubs having a rebound this week. I think it's important that they at least steady the ship here and move us in the right direction. So we'll see how things play out.
I hope so. And I want to thank everyone for listening. We'll talk to you again next time.